Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Hot Pursuit.
Today we have a really special guest that I'm excited to talk to. Normally, Hannah, I'm in New York. Hannah's in Los Angeles, and usually Mark Gurman is there with you.
That's right.
So he's in New York for, meetings, networking, whatever. But also Apple has introduced this new phone. I think it's called the 16E. I don't really keep up with the tech stuff too much unless I'm listening to Mark because he knows all of the inside information.
It's incredible. Mark Gurman, the chief tech correspondent, I think his title is. I mean, he basically just reports on Apple and Meta, but he is a fount of knowledge. It's kind of unbelievable. And I actually, ahead of this conversation, reread this story that he wrote for Business Week back in March of last year about how Apple spent $1 billion into the car that it never built. It's fascinating.
Yeah, very cool. Our Big Take Stories, I guess that's a brand that Bloomberg has. So on the terminal, you can type NI Big Take, but you can also just search for the Bloomberg Big Take online. I'm so excited to have him on the program. I also want to talk a little bit about a vehicle I'm driving. We get these press vehicles, and usually they're the most exciting and expensive and coolest vehicles out there. So that when I get like a normal everyday car, I don't really think much of it. But Nissan has given me a Frontier. It's their smaller truck. In America, I guess the mid-sized truck.
I love a small truck.
Right. Well, I wouldn't have thought anything of it except for the one they gave me was in orange. And I'm a sucker for orange.
They got your number.
And then, so I started looking a little bit more closely. It's the Pro 4X version, which is like their version of TRD, right? And it has really cool wheels and some sweet little accents in terms of design elements. And so I get in and I start driving it, and I remember there's a lot of fun to be had in driving sort of inexpensive Jeeps, which is essentially what it is. Yeah. Right? It's the same feel as driving a Wrangler or a Bronco. I know there's a bit of a difference between those two, but it's like right in the middle in terms of drivability. It's got a 3.8 liter V6. It's kind of, it's not cutting edge tech in terms of the motor, but it's well over 300 horsepower. It's peppy enough, and it's just like fun to drive one of these vehicles and think that I wouldn't have to spend like $100,000 on it.
Is this more of a work truck, more like a go out in the wilderness truck?
Yeah. Well, this is the go out in the wilderness version of it, right? I'm sure that most people who get it are still going to be going to Starbucks. Like, you're
not going to the job site necessarily.
Well, you could
going camping.
And that's the other thing I realized about this vehicle. Like, I love the Jeepish powertrain and handling and the suspension, and for an urban jungle like the New York metropolitan area, you kind of need that, right? Because everything else gets beat to hell. But when I look at these little trucks, you see the Canyon or the Colorado or the Ranger, I always think it's like an El Camino. Like, it's just they just made a car and put an open bed in it, but it's actually still a body on frame truck. And that ruggedness, I think, is so cool I think it starts at $40,000 for the price tag.
Wow.
Cool. In today's day and age, that's not an incredibly high price, and that is for this sort of top of the line Apex Predator version of the Nissan Frontier. So I just want to give a shout out to those and say, there are still affordable vehicles out there.
And I have to say, I'm looking at a photo right now. It's not tiny. It's got 4 doors. It's got a double cab, right? I'm assuming the one that you have.
Yes, it does. So it's a crew cab.
It's not like a tiny. It's not tiny. We're talking about it being a small truck, but
right. You don't want too many people of my height in it. I'm 6'3". I'm all legs, so I'm the seat's all the way back for me to drive, and I'm still. I don't know if I'd want to spend too much time in it, but
got it.
But yeah, for more regular sized or smaller humans, it's a fantastic truck, and it is a truck.
Cool.
Like, I guess I tend to be biased against things that are smaller than an F-150. And the fact is, so for example, Ford has been offering me the Ranger Raptor to try out for months, and I've just not taken them up on it because I'm like, well, why? I want the F-150 Raptor. But this has opened my eyes to a smaller truck experience, and now I'm really excited to try a few more of them. So
yeah,
I think it's pretty cool.
I learned to drive stick on a Ford truck. I do have a soft spot for trucks, so I'm all for it. That's great.
What have you been driving recently? I saw a little jelly bean sized or shaped
You mean the
vehicle.
Macan?
Yeah,
you mean the Macan EV?
Yes, and we're going to talk about it a little
Sure.
because I know Mark Gurman likes it as well. But
Yeah.
to me, the design is just meh.
But the design isn't really. I mean, we've seen the Macan in the market for years now, so the design itself isn't new.
I loved the previous look of the Macan. I thought when I first saw it, I think it was in 2015. It was right around the time they came out with the 911R, and I was at I guess an auto show, maybe Detroit and or maybe LA, and I thought, cool. It's like a lifted 4-door 911. Like, that's awesome. But this thing looks even more jelly beany to me. It's like the Tesla Model X and every other kind of, you still call them an SUV? I guess you still call it an SUV.
Yeah, I think you could. It's a compact SUV. You know what? I wasn't bothered by the design. I thought it looked cool. It's if you park it next to EV SUVs from like Audi, for instance, it certainly does look more dynamic. It really looks, especially the front where you have the stack of lights on either side and just sort of a wall in front. I don't want to say it looks like the front of the Urus, the Lamborghini SUV, but it could be reminiscent.
And it's smaller, right?
It's smaller, but there's a little spoiler on the back, so you can have a jelly bean with a spoiler, Matt, if you want. To me, it wasn't so markedly different than the many other Macans that are on the road. Obviously, this is the best-selling Porsche vehicle in the U.S. and the second best in the world. So to me, it wasn't radically different than the Macan we've already seen.
All right, well, I think...
But
I'm sure
you don't like it.
Well, I just don't love the design. I'm sure it drives great. And
Drives great.
For an EV, I wonder, does it have decent range? Is charging quick?
The variant that I drove is the Macan Turbo Electric.
Okay, hang on a second. I already have a problem.
What?
I already have a problem.
Go ahead.
Where's the turbo go?
Well, it's a marketing label at this point. And, it has been because we saw it in the Taycan as well. So, turbo denotes the highest variant at Porsche. It doesn't actually mean there's a turbocharger under the hood. Silly of us to expect that.
I didn't know they were going to stick with that.
They're pulling it
I
through.
knew they did it with the Taycan, but I thought enough people would have made fun of the executives. Oliver Bluma goes to a dinner party and someone's like,
they were impervious.
Hey, dude, really? The turbo? Are you serious? That they would have changed their minds. But
no, they're doubling down. So the Macan Turbo Electric there are 4 variants. It's the highest of the 4. It starts at about $105,000. To answer your question, it has 288.
It starts at $105,000. Starts at. That's for the turbo version.
That's the higher variant. I think the entry level starts at about $75,000. So there's a range there.
Okay.
The variant that I drove got up to about $130,000. That's adding things like 22-inch wheels with carbon fiber aero blades and things like that. Some of the lesser variants have more range, about 310 miles or so. This version that I drove has more power, 630 horsepower equivalent, but it has a little bit less range, 288 miles of range. I drove it up to Newcomb's. I really flogged it. As we've discussed, I get major range anxiety. I drove it for 4 days all over the city. Never actually got it under 30% of a charge left. So to me, it was incredibly usable. If I had it, it would be the type of thing I'm just charging it on the weekend at my house. Didn't seem like a big deal because the charging network in LA is not. I don't even think it's great in LA. You may fight me on that, but
No,
I've
I won't.
had problems.
I haven't ever really spent any time in LA, and so I also don't know what Newcomb's is. What's Newcomb's?
Newcomb's Ranch is used to be a restaurant. It's up Angeles Crest. It's 26 miles up Highway 2, up Angeles Crest, which is the highway through the mountains leaving Los Angeles. You can go up there to like Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear, and you can get into some snow even. Newcomb's Ranch used to be a restaurant. It's been abandoned for years. It's been for sale for years, and I remember I actually had a Thanksgiving meal there once. It was really nice. It's basically a destination now for people to just drive up to Newcomb's because it's a great drive, and there's a big parking lot there where you can park up and talk with your car buddies. But everyone has this dream about Newcomb's. I want to buy it and get the restaurant back working. And the problem with Newcomb's is there's one road in and one road out, and that road is subject to rock slides and mudslides and lots of snow, and that road is often closed arbitrarily by the powers that be. So if you're trying to get supplies and staff to your restaurant up the road 26 miles, it's difficult. And unpredictable. So in my opinion, that's the real challenge of Newcomb's. But
Well, it looks cool, and I hope you know how lucky you are living in a place like that. All right, let's get to our interview with Mark Gurman, because it's super fascinating and I think connected to a lot of these topics.
Yeah.
And then we'll touch base again. I'm pretty excited to talk to you because I had you on my TV show. You were saying some pretty interesting stuff about Apple that, everyone knows that they worked on a car and then canceled it. But you said you've actually seen, I guess, a prototype, and you think canceling it was a horrible strategic decision. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I think over the long term, canceling work on the self-driving car was a terrible strategic decision for Apple. Everything I saw pointed to an innovative sort of living room on wheels, a innovative, autonomous experience on the road, so much more than a car, right? Something where you can lay back and chill and FaceTime and watch TV. They had features at this time during development where you could hear the outdoors through special microphones and speakers in the car to make you feel like you were outdoors. They had a windowless design. The idea was you could just plug in where you're going and it would take you there. All sorts of different safety mechanisms. They even had this idea with no steering wheel. You could use your iPhone app as a controller for the car. And there was even a physical controller, almost like a PlayStation or Xbox controller, where you can take over. There was a call button to an Apple Command Center where they had rooms with steering wheels and they could take over manually to drive the car for you. So all sorts of just pretty amazing technology and designs that they worked on. The design looked absolutely phenomenal. It was like a blend of a Zoox and a Canoe and a BMW i3, but quite a bit bigger. It could fit 4 to 6 people. Basically lounging, right? A moving autonomous lounge on wheels. And I think it would have been remarkable and totally upended the industry. But Apple was not getting where it needed to get fast enough to an autonomous first environment. And by the time they realized they needed to pull the plug on full autonomy, they had invested so much money, billions, tens of billions, and it was too much. And they needed to start investing that money elsewhere into generative AI for phones and tablets and computers and the like. But I think over the long term, it was a strategic mistake. At some point, I think they're going to need to come back to it. But you spent 10 years building up this car division, hiring all the car people. Then you fired them all. You can't really reboot it that easily. It's going to have to take probably a new CEO, a new management team, and probably a decade and change in between. But I think an Apple car would have been revolutionary. And once Apple comes to a market, not only do they vanquish the market, but it starts heightening the competition and trying to get everyone else to build better products as well. So I think it would have been a great thing for the industry. And as someone who's into cars and into technology, I'm pretty disappointed.
Mark, I'm so curious about this, and I reread your big take story that you wrote about this in March of last year, and I really recommend our listeners to go read it. We'll include the link on the podcast. And I'm just curious on a philosophical level, how you really see this failed effort, because it seemed to me like a combination of perhaps arrogance. There was one point where you said, Apple kind of thought they were going to come in and vanquish. They were going to come in as like the latest, entry into a long established industry and vanquish everyone else. So there's that element, but also there's an element that cars are really hard to make. It's like, I say it all the time, it's a simple thing, but we've seen countless people think, hey boys, let's go build a car. Like you say in your piece, it seems like a good idea and everyone gets excited. And then, a year and $1 billion later, you realize it's a really hard thing to do. So I'm curious, how much of this failure was due to arrogance, was due to the fact that this is just a very hard thing, or should they have not gone for full level 5 autonomous driving and maybe set a goal a little bit more attainable? What's your thought?
Hannah, it was the arrogance to think that they could literally reinvent the wheel by going full autonomy at this state with the current requirements of the technology. It was the hubris to believe that Apple could do anything it sets its mind to. But no, this is a problem that isn't solvable right now at a level of quality, safety, and fit and finish that a company as big as Apple would require, right? Mm-hmm. Think of all the safety concerns with full autonomy. Mm-hmm. So that hubris is what really destroyed the project from day one. They were unwilling to move off of that standpoint. There were some people on Apple's management team that said, why don't we just release a better Tesla? Why don't we bring something that looks like the coolest car on the road, has amazing battery electronics and a manufacturing process, has tight integration with the Apple ecosystem, has the best car interior you've ever seen, has the best infotainment system you've ever seen. We can put limited autonomy features like Tesla did several years ago. Over time, maybe upgrade them. Why not just take Tesla head on? Mm-hmm. Other people are like, well, we're Apple. We have to do things completely different. We invented the iPhone, right? And I think the arrogance in that company, because of the success of the iPhone for the last 2 decades, led them down the wrong path. Apple can't do anything it sets its mind to, very clearly. Mm-hmm. I think if Apple released a true Tesla competitor, this conversation would be completely different. I think a real competitor Tesla focusing on design, compatibility with the Apple ecosystem, infotainment, limited autonomy features that could get better over time, I think it would have been a killer product. And they should, quite frankly, be pretty upset with themselves that they allowed this project to go in the entirely wrong direction from the very beginning.
Would they be partnered up with someone? I remember reports that, for example, they could work with Kia. I also know from talking to you about it that they have partnered up in other areas like CarPlay 2, which I want to get to in a little bit, with Porsche, which is like, top of the industry in terms of fit and finish, design, build quality, that sort of thing. So would they have partnered up with somebody else, or would they have tried to do it in-house?
Well, I think given Apple's ability to partner with manufacturing companies, there's Magna that does car manufacturing. They're based in Canada. There are manufacturers in Asia like Foxconn who are working on EV platforms and such. I think they could have partnered with them pretty easily. One failed partnership was with Tesla, right? Elon Musk.
Ask about that.
Yeah, Elon Musk basically offered up the company to Tim Cook almost a decade ago. He said no. This was when it was worth about $60 billion on the market cap. It wouldn't have really cost Apple much if you're incorporating stock and everything like that compared to what they have on hand, or what they had on hand at the time. So that was a big
even back then
mistake.
They had over $120 billion.
Yeah, they had way more. I mean, now they're trying to get to cash neutral, but back then they had several $100 billion in cash, right? Upwards of $200-300 billion in cash. They could have easily bought Tesla. They could have turned Tesla into the machine it is today even quicker than Elon Musk was able to, given all their partnerships and experience. So, I think that was a huge mistake by Tim Cook to not go down that Tesla path. I think there were some fears of what Elon Musk would have done to a larger Apple, which I don't think that's entirely unfounded, but I think that the benefits of such a partnership or an acquisition would have outweighed the risks. In terms of other partnerships, yeah, they talked to Kia, they talked to Ferrari, they talked to Volkswagen, they talked to Mercedes, BMW, and time again, they were not able to reach any consensus about a true partnership, who would do what. They got pretty far down the road on a partnership with one company one of the big German automakers, and they were really excited about how well the partnership was doing, so they pulled the plug on it thinking they don't need them as a partner. We can go at it
This was
alone.
Mercedes, right?
Yes, this was
Yes.
Mercedes. So they definitely had failures, leadership failures, financial-related failures all around. The former Apple CFO, Luca Maestri, who came from the car business, he was a finance executive at General Motors over in Europe. He pushed heavily against the car project because he knew firsthand how bad of a business it is in terms of the costs that go into it. But I think they were too scared to do something rational, and they focused on pipe dream levels of technology and essentially went nowhere.
You know, I know that, I think it was last year, I drove in a Mercedes-Benz that had level 3 autonomous driving capability. I rode/drove in that in LA. Do you happen to know if that system, that level 3 system, was developed during the time that Mercedes and Apple were in their talks to potentially work together? Is this something that probably resulted from that sort of partnership?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. In terms of things that came out of the Apple Car project that have hit the market at this point, the Apple Vision Pro started off within the Apple Car project. The initial effort to build augmented reality and virtual reality products at Apple wasn't a headset or glasses. It was actually the windshield and dashboard in the Apple Car. The idea was you are looking through this windshield in front of your car, and there's a ton of widgets, your speedometer, everything in an augmented reality fashion. That was too expensive to put into the car, so they moved it into a headset form factor, which obviously makes a ton more sense. The other things is Apple's upcoming push into personal robotics. They're working on some robotics devices. Don't forget, a self-driving car is essentially a robotics device. It's a robot on wheels, and the same underlying autonomy and SLAM and 3D technologies to do a self-driving car are the same tech you would use in a robot that roams through your home. And so that came out of that as well. And then Apple's chip efforts, they make these AI chips called the Neural Engine. The original Neural Engine was actually built to process the AI for self-driving autonomy on the car, and now that's in every iPhone and iPad and Mac that you buy today with the Apple in-house processor. So, you know, not all is lost from that project, except a potentially new $100 billion a year business that they are in not desperate need of right now, but will probably wish they had a few years
How
down
long
the
do you
road.
think it's going to be until they try and reboot, until they realize they need to?
I think it's going to be 5 to 15 years before they try to get back in the car space, but eventually they're going to have to. I mean, Steve Jobs and other executives at Apple at the time, 20 years ago, were talking about, more than 20 years ago, we're talking about the desire to own the next stage of technology after mobile. And, you know, they have long considered the car the ultimate mobile device. And so I think what really gave them inspiration was how much people loved CarPlay, which I know we're going to talk about. CarPlay, they launched in 2014. It was originally introduced in 2013 as iOS in the car. The concept is very simple. You plug your phone into the car, and it basically creates a new interface in your infotainment system that is an Apple-designed interface where you can do your texting, your Siri, your calls, messages, all sorts of stuff, third-party apps. And they have some pretty big ambitions for that.
I think the Ferrari, the FF, was one of the first cars available with CarPlay.
That's
I remember
right.
seeing it at the Detroit Auto Show, and I thought, wow, it's so cool, Ferrari working closely with Apple.
That's right. And Eddie Q, who's a senior vice president at Apple for services, one of Steve Jobs' closest confidants, really a disciple of his, he's on the board of Ferrari. And so he's doing a lot of those partnerships. CarPlay, you're right, it launched in the Ferrari first back in 2014. So 10 years ago, 11 years ago at this point. But their real ambition is to go deeper. So right now, CarPlay is very much tied to the Apple interface, your applications, iMessage, calls, FaceTime audio, third-party apps, WeChat, third-party mapping apps, Apple Maps, Siri, of course. But Apple's grander ambition is this project codenamed Ironheart, and that's CarPlay 2. This was announced back in 2022, so 3 years ago. The idea, revamping CarPlay so it can control not only your Apple interface, your Apple apps and services and functions there, but the functions in your car as well. What if CarPlay can expand to control in view your gauges, your electric, your speedometer, everything you would normally get in your instrument cluster? Control your climate in your car, control your seats, control your radio. So the whole car system operated by your iPhone, right? So they introduced this in 2022. The idea was to put the Apple interface in all the displays in your car, right? There's tons of cars now. You have a big digital display in a lot of cars replacing the old terrestrial instrument gauges, right? It's never launched. They've still been promising this thing. A couple years ago, they said their two partners at first would be Porsche and Aston Martin. Those two cars haven't launched yet with the new CarPlay. So it's an interesting...
Why not? What's the delay? What's the holdup?
So for one, CarPlay works so well, the current iteration, and is in so many cars. Everyone uses it and loves it because it's so easy. You plug it in.
Seamless.
Yes, you plug it in, it's seamless, it works. Why? Because it's a standardized Apple interface. You're getting the same interface everywhere you go. The idea with CarPlay 2 is that every car would have its own bespoke interface. So the iPhone would be loaded up with a different interface for every car. Ferrari would have its own UI, Aston would have its own UI, Range Rover its own UI, Rivian its own UI, you name it, right? That's a lot of work. There are so many car models on the road, right? Every car manufacturer wants to have a look just for it, and they need to sit down with Apple to create a look just for it. Because it's so tightly and deeply integrated into the deep systems within the car, right? That requires a lot of engineering time as well. It's not plug and play like the CarPlay we know today. So from a user interface design standpoint, you have a big blockade there. From an engineering and car component standpoint, you have a big blockade there. But I guess the biggest thing is that in this era, companies simply don't trust Apple, and they shouldn't. They saw Apple come in there and destroy the smartphone industry, the music industry, basically every industry it has entered, smartwatches. They don't want Apple to come in, steal their customer, and destroy their relationship with the people who own their cars. There is massive risk of basically handing over the keys, right, to your car business to Apple.
There's data concerns too, right?
There's probably data concerns as well, but I think the bigger concern is that Apple comes in, builds a new relationship with your customer, not a CarPlay interface, taking over your whole car, and then one day they come back, decide they want to build a car. Wow, I've loved using CarPlay 2 for all these years. I want the whole end-to-end Apple experience. Yeah. CarPlay is basically, it's a Trojan horse. It's basically an advertisement for Apple's eventual car.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a car manufacturer, why would I want to give up my customer to Apple? Why don't I go and try to build the best operating system and services I can? And that's what we've seen from GM.
Yep, exactly.
Right?
I mean, you know, for so long, CarPlay had already dominated. It had become table stakes. Like if you make a luxury car, it has to have CarPlay in it.
Right.
But I've noticed recently, first of all, if I get into a car that doesn't have wireless CarPlay, like ironically an Aston Martin or the new Porsche Carrera T didn't have it, and it's just like something's missing. But right. I recently got into a GMC Sierra EV, and I noticed there is no CarPlay at all,
right.
because they're trying to get away from it. They're trying to sort of wean themselves off of the consumer addiction to this Apple iOS.
Now, I don't believe what GM is doing is smart. I think that they should allow CarPlay, the OG version of CarPlay, the original plug-and-play version. I don't see the issue with that. Like you said, that's table stakes for when consumers are buying a new vehicle today. I agree that they should never in their right mind adopt CarPlay 2, because that's when you're really handing the keys over of your customer to the most powerful company in the world. There's no need to do that. And as tightly integrated as CarPlay could potentially be, I think there's a universe in which car makers can make an even more bespoke interface for their customers, right? So I agree. You don't want to support CarPlay 2. I'm with you. You don't want to support CarPlay 1. I think that is a mistake. And customers are telling GM that, so we'll see what happens. You have to build a better mousetrap if you're going to block what's really known as the best one.
Mark, what is the sense at Apple of any customer resistance to a car that is just completely screens with no buttons and knobs. And I ask because, when there are consumer feedback surveys, a lot of the most annoying things that people would say is, I don't want to have to go through levels in an interface in order to adjust my seat or put my window down. Just these simple tasks that a single button would accomplish far simpler. It seems like Apple, of course, would just go all pure screen all the time. Is there a conversation there?
There would be a lot of screens, but I think in some cases Apple has realized where buttons are important, right? It's funny. They've added more buttons to the iPhone. In the last 3 years, they've added 2 physical buttons to the iPhone.
Interesting.
For the previous 15 years in the iPhone history, they've never added a button. Now they have your action button. Now you have your camera button, the camera control interface on the side of the phone. So,
is that because people are saying, I would like to have that? I mean, is that...
Well, on the camera control button, I'm not sure anyone who asked for that. I think that I like it, but pretty much no one else agrees with me on that one.
No, I like it also.
Okay, Matt likes it. But the action button, okay, fine. You replace the mute switch with something that can be customizable, whatever. Nobody moves it off of the ringer switch. Matt, do you change your button?
No,
okay.
no. And on the watch also, I don't need it.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
And so... whatever. But I think that shows that Apple realizes that there is a place for tactile buttons. And I would guess in a car, first of all, the windows weren't going to open anyways. So let's scrap that one. You had the microphones to feed in the outside audio instead. It's ridiculous. Siri would be the main control vehicle for the car
I was going to
anyways. But yeah, in places where tactile switches, where those make sense, people would probably have those. Apple would want to implement it. It's funny, there are so many cars now that have a touchscreen display for the AC stuff. I don't like that. I would rather the physical switches for that. In Apple's case, you would probably have it all touchscreens. But that's neither here nor there, because whatever this next car project from Apple, it's hopefully going to come in a time when Siri actually works properly and we'll be able to really have finite control over the overall system. Now, Hannah, to your point earlier about people at Apple, how they felt about this, I think one of the big arguments inside Apple is that the people making the decisions are people who love driving their cars and getting behind the wheel. Apple has this ethos.
I'm surprised to hear that at a tech company.
Yeah. Huge mistake to let your dated philosophies and your own personal hobbies get in the middle of Apple's product pipeline. I don't agree with that. The future is clearly autonomous. You love driving behind the wheel. You can continue driving behind the wheel. But there should be vehicles for everyone. You can drive your Porsche or Ferrari or Aston Martin, but also have the autonomous cars. Just like on smartwatches, right? There's plenty of Apple executives who are big Rolex, Patek Philippe, Cartier, AP fans, whatever. You have those for your wedding nights or your going out nights, but you've got your Apple Watch for your 9 to 5, right? And so I think that, maybe it wasn't such a big dynamic there, but definitely people at Apple love driving their cars. And so felt like, why would we want to change the industry when we kind of love how it works? We love our cars, right?
I'm curious to know what cars you love, because you are so steeped in the tech industry, and you also are a fan of vehicles. So are there any cars out there that you think are particularly interesting? I mean, obviously, we all love a Porsche 911, and we all would love a Ferrari. But is there anything that you think is fascinating, considering both of the worlds that you stand in?
I'm an EV guy. Maybe that's not surprising. And I'm not an EV guy for the energy or climate benefits. I mean, those are nice, but I love the acceleration of EVs. I think it's just amazing. I'm a techie, so I like the battery architecture. I like being able to charge at home. I like not being able to fill up with gas. I like that it's super quiet. So I like those technical focused benefits. I'm a huge fan of the Porsche Taycan. I'm a big fan of the new Macan EV from Porsche.
Just drove it.
There you go. And I have a fantasy for an Aston Martin. More of a Lamborghini guy than a Ferrari guy.
Oh.
Me too.
Yeah. So, some of those Italian cars. Ask me about Tesla, right? Like, I got to tell you. So I had a Tesla Model Y. I had it on a 3-year lease. Not getting another one of those. I mean, the new one.
Why not?
I was just not a fan of the fit and finish. My driver's seat fell apart. We had issues with the doors. The display hinge got loose. It's just not a well-manufactured product. And the new Model 3 my wife has, she doesn't drive it much, but she likes it a lot. The quality seems quite a bit better on the new Model 3 versus the old Model 3s and the Model Y, so maybe they'll get there, but I'm just not a fan of the Tesla product at this point.
Mark, I have one more question for you, if we have time. Just in terms, I would want to hear about the competition that Apple would or is facing as it considers or not coming out with this CarPlay 2, but also the car itself.
Yeah, you mentioned Foxconn.
Especially as it relates to China, because obviously we don't have Chinese-made vehicles here or from Chinese companies. But it's coming, and the Chinese market has really proved devastating to traditional automakers, especially in Europe this past year, just because they've figured out a way to make great EVs. How does that affect Apple?
So let me break this down. It's actually quite simple. All the Chinese guys, they're going to come out with their own cars. They're already doing it. Mm-hmm. These are basically phones, tablets, computers on wheels. The autonomy part, I think, is really not important right now. You have to get there eventually, but today it's not so important. The iPhone is struggling in China. It's pretty much Apple's most important market for the future, as are the surrounding countries, right? India, across Southeast Asia, etc. So all these Chinese companies are going to get a lot of fans of their cars. They're going to sell them cheap. They're going to get them in the driveways of everyone. Mm-hmm. Maybe they have an iPhone today, but I can tell you they're going to fall in love with those Chinese EVs, and they're probably going to buy the phone and tech ecosystem that corresponds to those EVs one day.
Right. You want to be in all the same ecosystem.
I got to ask, though,
a lot of my really tech-heavy friends, or friends that understand tech better than the average layperson, they seem to prefer Windows or Android or Linux or whatever. But I feel like the Apple ecosystem, the iOS, is so intuitive and so easy to use for most people. Is there anyone else who really can compete? Is Xiaomi making something that's that good? Or I don't know other manufacturers, but Samsung, is anyone else making something that is that easy to use and that addictive in terms of getting sucked into the ecosystem?
In terms of sucking you into the ecosystem, absolutely not. I mean, Apple's the one that's able to pull you in from their marketing, their features, how intuitive they are, the applications and services they have available. But I can tell you that a car could have the same effect, and that is the risk for Apple. Any piece of the ecosystem breaking open will open the floodgates. And so you need to own every piece of the ecosystem. That's why, even though Apple's smart speakers are some of the worst in the industry, you got to have them, because if Amazon Alexa is going to make it work, and Amazon one day releases a tablet or a phone or a computer or whatnot that's compelling enough, you're going to start losing people if you're Apple. So owning every important aspect of the ecosystem is really important. And for now, it's Apple CarPlay in the automotive space. There'll be more partnerships there, but at some point, Apple's going to need an on-the-road end-to-end experience.
I knew he would be an awesome guest.
I know. I want to have him back every month. He's fascinating.
He just knows so much, and I love the way, he's so quick to compute and spit out an answer. It's like having your own Chat GPT in human form.
That's a huge compliment.
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, I know it's true. And I also love how he's pretty straightforward. Like, he just says, yeah, Apple was arrogant. There was a lot of hubris there. And no, I don't think automakers should allow CarPlay 2 to be in the cars. It's definitely don't trust Apple. Like, I like how he's just very blunt about it.
Yes, I think he's one of these journalists who is so smart and so good at his job.
Yep.
All right, cool. What have you got coming up? Have you got anything?
Oh, man. Well, this week is Freeze Week in LA, so it's been a lot of art things. But last night I went to this very cool party at the Chateau where an artist
Chateau Marmont?
Yes, Chateau Marmont. Where an artist named Anthony James put an Aston Martin Vanquish in this huge light box with like infinity mirrors and amazing lights, and they craned the 4,000-pound car and the 6,000-pound light box over Sunset Boulevard and dropped it by the pool at the Chateau. It was very cool. And Anthony's a friend. I've known him for many years. So it was really cool to see that. And then that car and the art display is going to be auctioned off for charity in a few months to help with LA fire relief and rebuilding. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. So freeze, I thought you meant like it's cold, but you're talking about FRIZE.
Yeah, ZE. It's the LA Art Fair.
It's Freeze is a broad horizontal band of sculpted or painted decoration, usually on a wall or a ceiling. I'm just looking it up.
Yeah, well, that is the definition of the word. And also, it's kind of like a mini Art Basel in a way.
So why
LA
did this
style.
guy choose the Aston Martin? Is he a car guy, or
So first of all, he's British, so he's got a sensitivity for British automakers. But Anthony has owned tons of interesting cars for years. When I first met him, he had an '81 Rolls-Royce Corniche that he was driving around. He's got a 5 or 6 Alfa Romeos at the moment. He's got, I'm not going to blow him up completely, but he's owned Italian cars from other Italian brands. He is actually a legitimate car guy. And so, I think this is just one of his things. He's done a lot of this sort of endless infinity lightbox thing. He's got a big sculpture at the Pendry. You might have seen it in sculptures. He just had a big one in Aspen installed. So they're everywhere. And he actually, when I first met him, he had put a crashed Ferrari, his own crashed Ferrari, in a box, a light box with some birch
he
trees.
crashed it?
It's unclear. I'm going to plead the fifth on that. It might have, it was damaged. I'm just going to say the car was damaged. And he put that in the box. It's very cool. You can Google it. So he's got a long history of affinity for cars. And
we should have him on the show.
I'm going to get him on the show. I actually mentioned it to him last night, and he said he'd be happy to come on. So we just got to pick a date, and he can tell us himself about his love for cars.
All right. That sounds very cool.
Yeah, it was great.
I am off to Austin.
This
my
is
first
awesome.
of twin trips to Austin. Yeah, so I'm going to go down there and ride motorcycles with the CEO of actually, I'm going to ride the new Harley Davidson lineup, and I was supposed to go with the CEO of Harley Davidson, Jochen Seitz. But it's unclear now if Jochen is going to go. They said, you know what, he might not be coming. Would you still be interested in riding our full lineup if he doesn't join?
Oh.
And I said 100%,
Yeah,
absolutely
it's
yes.
fine.
I still want.
There's only one answer there.
I mean, the main thing I want to do is ride the bikes, right? But
Of course.
I would have loved to ask him a million questions about, Harley's stock has been down and their sales have been down, and I want to see them do well.
Why can't he make it? No.
I'm not
what's your
100%.
sense?
I'm not 100% clear on why he can't
Okay.
make it. But
All
you
right.
know that Harley is being talked about in terms of reciprocal tariffs now. Last time Trump put on tariffs, then Europe responded by putting big tariffs on Harley and Levi's and Jack Daniels. And to me, this would be a point of pride, right? You're one of the most American products in the whole world.
Completely.
And that's why they're doing that. And of course, it hurts more to the people in Europe because they want to buy that American product.
Yes.
In any case, I don't know exactly why, and I hope still to talk to him. But I also, I don't know how this squares with my journalist integrity, but I root for this company to come back, right? As I want it to be an American success story. I want the manufacturing business to grow. I want the workers to have better, more solid, high-paying jobs. Like, to me, we should all be rooting for Harley Davidson to make a comeback.
You know what that makes me think? To me, the biggest fans also have the right to be the biggest critics. And you criticize and critique because you actually do care. And it you want it to do well. You want it to do better than it is, and you see that it can. You know, and you're pained that it's not. So I get that.
By the way, this is a company where it's really easy to criticize, right? Because they're selling basically nostalgia. They're selling you like a 60s or 70s ideal of this, born to ride, easy rider, the guys coming back from World War II, and this is, how they get their freedom. But they've got to do it in a modern way, a more fuel efficient way. They've got to put out better horsepower numbers. Everybody wants an engine that's, technologically advanced, but I also still want this 2-liter lump. So I feel like they're threading a needle in a really successful way. And I'm just pretty thrilled to be able to test the products.
That's great. I had a thought, and this is not directed at Harley Davidson at all, but I also think it's possible for a company to have a shelf life. And this is, again, not directed at any specific company, but not all companies are going to exist forever and last forever. And if they fail to adapt and evolve, they've got a shelf life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're seeing competitors come into this market. Obviously, Indian came back years ago and has had varying degrees of success. Ducati has tried to put up a fight against the American cruisers with its X Diavel, and I don't know how much success they've had with that. In general, the motorcycle market is just a tough slog right now and has been since the great financial crisis. I don't know what's going to turn that around, but maybe I can be part of it.
Yeah. Yes. I still would love to. Let's get some electric Vespas going. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Come on. Come on.
I'm sure. I mean, they are out there. The question is, right now, they're not really cost efficient. They're so expensive.
Do you think the world would be a better place if everybody rode a motorcycle?
Yes, 100%.
I do agree with that as well.
Yeah, because you're not in that cage. You're not like watching a movie. You're part of the movie. You're in the scene.
People would drive very differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Well, it's been great talking to you today.
Likewise.
Thank you so much
Good one.
for joining us.
So much fun.
All right. I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott. And this is Bloomberg.